Hello everyone. Today's program comes from Wiedemann Hall on the campus of Wichita State University and features two members of the Grammy-nominated Orfeo Trio who came to Sarasota last January. They performed on the Sarasota Music Archive series, and they were so well received that we invited them to do this program. We're continuing with the monumental Beethoven theme because it is Beethoven's 250th birthday this year. Julie Bees is professor and head of the piano department at Wichita State. As a prize winner in major competitions when she was young, her performing career took her to major venues in many parts of the world, where she performed with orchestras and in solo and chamber music concerts. She has an international reputation as a teacher, and her students have come from various parts of the world to Wichita State and have gone on to win competitions and hold faculty positions at many fine music schools. Russian cellist and recording artist Leonid Shukaev was professor at St. Petersburg Conservatory and the Rimsky-Korsakov Music College. When he came to America, he was on the faculty at Oberlin Conservatory for many years. His students have been winners in international competitions, and they play and teach in conservatories throughout Europe and in Russia. As a member of the St. Petersburg Quartet, Mr. Tsukayev regularly performed in North America, Europe, and Asia, and on well-known international music festivals. The quartet has won numerous prizes and awards. We're most fortunate to engage these superb artists, and they will captivate you with their beautiful playing. They'll delight you with some in-depth talks about the pieces that they're performing, and they'll help guide your listening with some musical descriptions of those works. So please welcome Mr. Tsukayev and Miss Bees.
The first time the young Beethoven met the renowned Haydn in 1719 Bonn, when Haydn, together with his impresario Johann Salomon, stopped off on their way to London. To that time, Beethoven had established a very considerable reputation in northwest Germany as a piano virtuoso with a particular talent for improvisation. Mozart had been one of the greatest improvisers of the age, but by all accounts, Beethoven surpassed him. He can move the audience to tears more easily than any other pianist of the time. Beethoven played for Haydn, improvised, and Haydn mentioned that in the future Beethoven will be a #1 composer in variation form writing. And indeed, that form was very important for Beethoven. During his life, he produced over 60 pieces written in the variation form. His 7 variations for cello and piano on the theme from Mozart's Magic Flute, he composed in 1801, and they were published in 1802 with a dedication to the Count Johann von Braun, one of Beethoven's first patrons. But that was not the first piece for the cello and piano written by Beethoven. In 1796, he had been on a long trip. He visited Prague, Potsdam, Dresden, and Berlin. As a result of that trip, he composed 4 pieces for cello and piano, 2 sonatas and 2 sets of variation, one on the theme of Mozart's Magic Flute, another on the theme of Handel's Judas Maccabeus opera. His choice of cello to pair with piano was influenced by kings of Prussia own preference to this instrument. Friedrich Wilhelm II was an amateur cellist, and he played in a string quartet. He was a student of Jean-Pierre Duport, and Haydn in 1787 published his 6th quartet of Opus 50 with a dedication to the Prussian monarch. And Mozart, in his letter 2 years later, showed intention to produce the similar half-dozen works, of which only 3 quartets were finished, and we know them as the Prussian quartets. The difficult cello part testified to the king's high technical accomplishments. Beethoven was young but very ambitious pianist and composer. So he would like to avoid competition in quartet writing with the famous Haydn and Mozart. So he decided to compose piece for piano, so he will able to play by himself for the king. And for the cello, the king's favorite instrument, having in mind that Berlin court has at that time two famous cellists, French cellists, Duport brothers, Jean-Pierre and Jean-Louis Duport. We know that Beethoven played several times at the court of Friedrich Wilhelm II, and on his departure he received a gold snuff box filled with golden coins, and Beethoven was very proud that it was not an ordinary snuff box, but one of a kind that are presented to ambassadors. There were three famous cellists who had a strong impact on the way how Beethoven composed his cello pieces. Bernhard Romberg and the four brothers. Bernhard Romberg was a German cellist and composer. Beethoven met him in 1790 in Bonn, where Romberg was engaged as a court musician of the Prince Elector of Cologne. Beethoven admired him and respected very highly as a musician. Romberg was famous for developing a thumb technique for the cello. He made the fingerboard of the instrument longer. That allowed the cellist to play in very high thumb position, and that's probably why all three sets of Beethoven variations for cello and piano have something for the cello part written in very high thumb position. Also, Romberg slightly changed the angle of the fingerboard and make it flatter on the side of a bass string. That's allowed for cello and double bass. And that's allowed the players on those instruments to produce more powerful, more resonant tone on the bass strings. And that's probably why one of his 7 variations, variation number 4, written as bass baritone variation. Duport brothers were also very famous, two famous cellists. Jean-Pierre was engaged at the Berlin court as a principal of Royal Opera, the director of chamber music at the Royal Chapel, and as instructor for the prince and then later for the king. His younger brother, Jean-Louis, was a favorite musician of French nobility. He had fled France on the eve of revolution to join his brother in Berlin. And sweetness and beauty of his tone is said to have surprised Voltaire. Monsieur Duport, said Voltaire, you will make me believe in miracles, for I see you can turn an ox into a nightingale. So Duport did for the cello what Viotti was doing at the same time for the violin playing. They turned their attention to the matters of sustained power, different type of articulation and emotional expression. Why Beethoven would like to choose the themes from Mozart Magic Flute opera and Handel's Judas Maccabeus opera? Handel was one of his favorite composers, and he admired in Handel his ability to evoke emotion, construct a drama out of 3-4 note scrap of a motif, and his choice of the theme might have been influenced by the recent production of the opera in Vienna in 1794 and in Berlin in 1796. Plus to that, the king by himself was a member of Handel fan club. So Beethoven was very smart. The same situation with the Magic Flute. That was the favorite opera by Mozart, and Beethoven's favorite opera by Mozart. The opera had received its premiere in Vienna only 14 months before Beethoven first time arrived to the city. And in 1801, when he composed his 7 variations, there were over 200 performances of the opera in the city. Productions also were taking place throughout Germany and beyond, and that was the favorite. Audience loved that opera, they knew it very well, so it was a very smart choice to pick up a theme for his new piece from that music which everybody enjoyed. In 1801, Vienna's Imperial Theatre put on its own new production of the opera, and shortly after that, Beethoven composed his 7th variation for cello and piano. The theme comes from the duet which is sung by Pamina and Papagena as praise to the love between husband and wife. Despite the difference on their amatory status, Pamina, who just learned that Pamina just learned that Pamina loves her, and Papagena laments that he could not get even a Friday night date, bemoaning his lack of a Papagena. But there is one thing that they both could agree on, and that is that love is great. That subject was very important for Beethoven himself. It is well known that he tried to find a soulmate and had been in love while composing 7 variations of a particular long period, 7 whole months. That's probably why he composed 7 variations. Variations vary differently, strongly in mood and characters, from energetic and playful and joyful to sorrowful, but all hold to the 15-measure structure of the theme. Thus fulfilling all the expectations, formal expectations of the melodic variation, Beethoven, such as rich ornamentation of the theme. One variation is supposed to be written as a in minor mode, one variation is written as a lyrical adagio variation, and the final variation is supposed to be written in a quicker tempo than the theme. But Beethoven makes sure that each variation as different as possible from its neighbors by giving each distinct rhythmic and textural profile. Thus, the first variation treats the theme like chopped liver, doing it out in punchy little rhythmic chunks with accents and staccato strokes, leaving you dazzled by music mosaic, because four note motif on which variation is based you could hear almost in every bar. The second variation could not get enough of runs, virtuoso scales and passages. Third variation is lyrical. It sings a praise of melodic ornament, which is known as the turn. Variation number 4, written in unusual tonic minor key. It takes a walk on the dark side to offer a portrait of psychological fragility, lyrical introspection, and the original form of duet, when which each singer presenting material separately and both singing together, is preserved in variation. Piano plays the Pamina's opening lines and cello answering in tenor roles. But in this variation, cello part written as bass baritone variation and very dark low register with quite spooky bare bones accompaniment in the piano part. Variation number 5 picks up the pace in a merry game of tag between the instruments, very playful, written in scherzando style. Variations reach their emotional center in the lyrical, lavishly ornamented adagio, which sound like a love duet between the instruments. The final toy tapping variation, written in a faster tempo than the theme, and is succeeded by the quite lengthy coda, which is started by a new theme in C minor, approaches that sort of thematic treatment one could expect in course of sonata form, free of all limitation of melodic variation. In the final measures, the head motif of the theme returned back to dissolve in a gentle decrescendo before the final fortissimo chord that closed the piece.
Well, this brings back a lot of memories. When I was in high school, I was in Austin, Texas for a piano competition, and one of the judges was a famous pianist and teacher named Leonard Shukaev. He was a student of the great Arthur Schnabel, who was the very first pianist to record all 32 Beethoven sonatas. Now, I had never heard this sonata, but I did overhear Mr. Shukaev chastising one of my competitors, a young man, and telling him, "Young man, don't you know, nobody should play Opus 109 before they're 30 years old." And so I didn't. I heard for the first time when I was in college in a master class, and frankly, I didn't understand the first two movements. But boy, did the third movement reach out to me. I couldn't wait to turn 30 years old. Same year, I also for the first time heard the Goldberg variations of Bach performed by Glenn Gould. It's a legendary piano recording, and I was like head over heels in love with it. Nobody was telling me I couldn't play it, so I started learning it. There was just something about that piece too. And then after I graduated from that school, I went to Vienna, Austria to study for a few years. And because one of the music history professors at Peabody told me that if I wanted to learn how to play Mozart well, and I didn't, I needed to hear a lot of Mozart opera. So as a student, I was able to get a ticket to the Vienna State Opera for about 6 cents, standing room, but still, you know, I'm young. And it turned out my absolute favorite opera was The Magic Flute of Mozart. And I'm just so happy to hear that that was Beethoven's favorite opera too. And I can relate to Beethoven in that set of variations we played. The duet was between Pamina and Papageno, and Papageno at that time couldn't even get a Friday night date. Well, Beethoven was really shy too, and he was pretty lonely for about the same reason. And my favorite part of that opera was when the evil Queen of the Night sings this aria. To die for. Oh. Anyway, so we get to the last 10 years of Beethoven's life, 1817 to 1827. By that time, he's completely deaf. No more performing or conducting for this guy. He had bad health, like constant diarrhea, some liver problems. And when he was composing and thinking about music, he would sing in his apartment at the top of his lungs. And the neighbors would complain because it was like any time of day or night. So he had to move often. And his servants quit all the time because he was a mess, didn't clean up after himself at all, was grumpy. Well, he was grumpy because he had money problems. Vienna wasn't the same as it was when he first came there. In the meantime, France had invaded twice and occupied Vienna twice, and there were spies and secret agents all over the place, so he had to be careful, even when he was just writing in a conversation book. He had to be careful what he was saying. And the economy was a mess. The shilling was worth only 20% of what it had been worth when he first came to Vienna. And some of his patrons, as a result, had gone bankrupt, had died. And Archduke Rudolph was the only patron who could cough up enough more money to keep Beethoven receiving as much money, you know, in those dollars or shillings as it was when he first started. So that helped, but he also had to get some commissions from publishers to help make up the difference. If that wasn't bad enough, his favorite brother died. And this guy had a little boy named Carl, who was 9 years old, and named Beethoven and the boy's mother as co-guardians of the boy. Well, Beethoven did not approve of his sister-in-law at all. He thought she had loose morals, and she probably did. So he took her to court to gain full custody of Carl. Only she wasn't going to give up. So he had to go to, I don't know, 3 or 4 different court cases till he finally got court custody. Now, he so disapproved of this sister-in-law that you know what he called her in his conversation book? The Queen of the Night. I just love that one. Then during this time of the court cases, people said he almost had a nervous breakdown. He wasn't composing much. The only thing he really accomplished, well, it was a pretty good accomplishment, was the Clavier Sonata, Opus 106, which took him 15 months to complete. And he had a commission for the Missa Solemnis, which he was supposed to conduct, but he didn't make the deadline, so he didn't finish that yet. He kind of let that slide once the premiere was already passed. But then somebody sent him, Mr. Broadwood in London sent him a new piano. This would be the 3rd piano that Beethoven owned. And this one, the keyboard was expanded. And this must have really intrigued Beethoven, because once he got full custody of Carl, his nephew, he settled down, he got into a happy place, and he also got a letter from a publisher asking him to write some more piano sonatas. This was in April of 1820. By September, he had finished Opus 109, the one we're going to hear today, except for a few, proofreading things. And it's one of 3 of what we call the last 3 sonatas, and it makes a nice recital program if you have big stamina. Anyway, these last 3 sonatas, they all have some kind of the same atmosphere, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So he finished this in 1820, and as I said earlier, the 3rd movement is really the heart of the work. And previously, when Beethoven wrote a piano sonata, the big guns were in the 1st movement. We remember Moonlight Sonata by the 1st movement, the Pathetique Sonata by the 1st movement, but we don't remember so much the 1st movement of Opus 109 unless you have performed it, And there's just something about that theme and the way he develops it through these, he's got 6 variations following it. But it took me back when I was working, I played the program of the last 3 sonatas, and one day when I was practicing, I just had this flashback to being a little girl in Miami, Florida. This was before air conditioning, that's how old I am. And my dad would sit out in the backyard at night, and I would sit with him because I adored him. And he'd be drinking a beer and smoking a cigarette. We'd be cooling off, in the evening. And he would point out all the constellations, because in those days we didn't have all those city lights, and you could see everything so clear. I can still remember how clear it was before I got cataracts. And I remember just looking up at the skies at night with this sense of awe, this sense of wonder, this sense of, my God, what are we? I feel like just a little tiny bit of dust compared to this sky here with all the, where did I come from? What's going to happen to me when I die? What am I going to be when I grow up? Where did I come from? All these things that we think about there, I think we call it metaphysical kind of things. But that's what the 3rd movement of this sonata reminds me of, that kind of, you don't know where you come from, and you have all these experiences, and you don't know where you're going to go. But it makes a complete circle somehow. So let's talk about the music. The 1st movement, very, very short. historically short sonata form. I mean, once he states the theme in 7 measures, and then bingo, we're in the second theme. That's contrasting. And the motive for the melody, if you can call it a melody, is something like maybe Beethoven was stealing something from something he already wrote, like and he was, but he transformed it into something. And second movement comes, the first movement is so short, and then there's a fermata on the last note. Then the second movement comes crashing in fortissimo. In the first movement, we had a descending line. In the second movement, we have another descending line. I mean, that descending line is very important for the movement. Then comes that third movement. You know, I had a friend at Peabody who said to me one day, "You know, Julie, you have a keen grasp of the obvious." Now, what did that mean? I mean, I was very quiet, I didn't say much, but you know, I think I was on to something when I fell in love with the third movement of this Beethoven sonata, and I fell in love with the Goldberg variations. There's something similar about them, and one thing that's similar is that in the Goldberg variations we have, for the theme, a saraband. Symmetrical theme. Saraband, by the way, is a slow, stately dance in 3/4 with the emphasis on the second beat. And then you have the same thing, a saraband. 2, 3. And you notice the left hand, the bass line, instead of going down like in the first 2 movements, it's going up. And he has 6 variations. They're pretty cool. There's, you know, you can tell he studied Bach because there's like a 2-part invention. There is a variation that takes something sort of from the credo in the Missa Solemnis and makes it into a Bach-like fugato. Okay, and then the last variation, you can tell how in love he was with his new piano because he goes to the edges of the keyboard. He starts with slow notes, he doubles them, then they're 3 times as fast, and then there's 4 times as fast, 6 times as fast, and then he gets to trills, which he was fascinated with. They're in the middle at first, but then he goes down in the bottom like an earthquake sound, and then he's got the melody up in the very top over a trill like stars. So you've got the heaven and the earth. And then there's the homecoming, just like the Goldberg variations, which Bach only did 30 variations, but then he comes back to the same theme exactly as it is at the beginning. Beethoven came back to the same theme at the very end. And this time at the very end, there's a little retard at the end of the movement, and he puts a pedal on the final chord. And it just sort of started from nowhere and went nowhere. But we had a whole world in between. Thank you very much.